There was a time when you almost stopped believing that your life would ever change, chosen one. A time when every morning felt heavier than the night before and every prayer seemed to disappear into silence. You smiled in front of people while carrying battles inside your chest that nobody could hear. And the strange part was not the pain itself, but how endless it felt, like you had somehow been trapped inside a storm with no exit, no answer, no mercy. But listen carefully, because this moment matters more than you realize. What if the suffering that chased you for years was never meant to stay forever? What if the fire you walked through had an ending already written by Allah before the first tear ever fell from your eyes? And what if the enemy wasted everything trying to destroy someone Allah had already chosen to survive? Because right now something is shifting around your life, and deep down you can already feel it. The exhaustion is different now. The pressure does not carry the same weight anymore. The attacks that once crushed your spirit are beginning to lose their grip, and there is a reason for that. Because some seasons are not punishments, they are preparation, and once the lesson is complete, the door to that suffering closes forever, never to open again. You spent years wondering why the same kind of pain kept returning, wearing different faces. Different people betrayed you, but the wound felt identical. Different situations collapsed, but the heartbreak sounded the same inside your soul. And there were nights when you quietly asked yourself if this cycle would ever stop, because every time you started rebuilding your peace, another storm appeared to drag you back into survival mode. But what you could not see was that the enemy survives through repetition. Darkness does not create anything new, it only recycles fear until a person becomes too tired to resist anymore. That was the real battle against your life, not just to hurt you once, but to trap you inside an endless loop of disappointment and emotional exhaustion until you forgot who you were. Yet something unexpected happened. You endured longer than the cycle expected you to. You survived every attempt to break your spirit. And the moment you survived without surrendering your faith, the cycle itself began collapsing from the inside, because patterns only continue when they still have power over the soul, and your soul has outgrown the prison that once held it captive. There are people around you who still think you are the same wounded person they once knew, but they cannot understand what surviving did to your spirit. They saw your tears, but they never saw the transformation happening underneath the pain. They watched you struggle without realizing Allah was rebuilding you in places nobody else could touch. And now, the same attacks that once destroyed your peace cannot even reach you the same way anymore, not because life became perfect, but because your spirit became stronger than the storm itself. You learned how to recognize deception before it fully reveals itself. You learned how to protect your heart without turning cold. And you learned that silence can sometimes save you more than explaining yourself ever could. The suffering changed you in ways your enemies never predicted. They thought the fire would weaken you forever, but instead it sharpened your discernment and forced you to become someone who cannot easily be manipulated again. And that is exactly why the old cycles are losing access to your life. Something powerful happens when a believer survives what was supposed to destroy them, because survival creates a kind of wisdom that comfort can never teach. And the truth is, your pain was never meaningless, even when it felt unbearable. Every betrayal exposed hidden truths. Every delay forced you closer to Allah. Every lonely night revealed how strong your spirit really was. And while people thought you were falling apart, Allah was teaching you how to survive without depending on temporary things, because some lessons cannot be learned through ease. They can only be learned inside the fire, and once the lesson becomes part of your soul, the suffering that carried it no longer has permission to stay. This is why your life feels different now, even if your surroundings have not fully changed yet. Your spirit is no longer standing in the same place where the pain once found you. You have crossed a spiritual distance that your enemies still cannot understand. And hear this clearly, because many people miss this truth completely. The enemy threw everything at you because it believed this would finally be the season that ended your story. That is why the attacks felt heavier than anything before. One problem came after another without giving you time to breathe. Emotional pressure mixed with mental exhaustion, disappointment mixed with isolation, fear mixed with confusion. It felt like every weakness inside your heart was being targeted all at once, but the reason the war became so intense was because darkness was running out of options. They used the strongest weapons they had, because they knew if you survived this season, you would never be vulnerable in the same way again. And look at yourself now. After everything, you still wake up, still pray, still move forward, still carry hope, even after the battles tried to suffocate it. Your survival already proved something terrifying to the forces fighting against you. They used their sharpest weapons, and you are still standing. The next season of your life will not look like the last one, because Allah does not keep His servants trapped inside the same furnace forever. There comes a moment when the trial completes its purpose, and the door finally closes behind it, and that moment is closer than you think, because the pain that once controlled your emotions is beginning to lose authority over your future. You are no longer reacting the same way, no longer collapsing over the same disappointments, no longer begging for people who only brought confusion into your life. Your spirit is slowly stepping into a higher level of peace, and that peace terrifies your enemies more than your pain ever did, because wounded people are easier to control, but healed people become dangerous to darkness. Healed people stop chasing validation, stop tolerating disrespect, stop returning to places Allah already rescued them from, and once that transformation happens, the old suffering cannot easily return. Remember this, because it explains everything you survived. The enemy never wanted you comfortable, they wanted you exhausted. Exhaustion was the real strategy against your life, because tired souls stop dreaming, tired hearts stop believing, tired minds begin accepting things they were never meant to tolerate, and for years the attacks against you were designed to drain your faith little by little until you surrendered your future without even realizing it. But despite all the pressure, you kept moving, even when your strength felt almost gone, and every time you chose patience instead of destruction, you unknowingly weakened the forces fighting against you, because darkness depends on emotional reactions to keep control over people. But once a believer learns how to survive pain without abandoning Allah, the enemy begins losing influence over their destiny. Pay attention, because this next season will confuse many people around you, those who watched you suffer became comfortable seeing you in survival mode. They expected your story to end in exhaustion. They assumed your spirit would eventually break under pressure. But now Allah is about to reveal a different version of you, calmer, wiser, more disciplined, more focused, less desperate for acceptance. And that transformation will make certain people uncomfortable, because your healing exposes the failure of everything that tried to destroy you. They wanted your wounds to define your identity forever. But Allah never intended your pain to become your permanent home. The storm was temporary, even when it felt endless. And soon the same people who watched you struggle will quietly witness your peace becoming stronger than the chaos that once surrounded your life. There is also another truth you need to understand. Some of the heaviness you carried was never entirely yours. Families pass down emotional wounds without realizing it. Cycles of anger, fear, broken trust, constant hardship. Spiritual weakness can move from one generation to another when nobody chooses to confront them through patience and faith. And sometimes Allah chooses one person in the family to become the turning point, the one who suffers differently because they are carrying the responsibility of ending what previous generations tolerated. This is why your struggles often felt bigger than your age, bigger than your circumstances, bigger than what seemed fair, because your journey was not only about you. Your endurance was creating a future that the people after you may never fully understand. Every prayer you made during your hardest nights was not only protecting your own future, but also breaking patterns that could have continued for generations. You may not realize how much your survival already changed the spiritual atmosphere around your life, because surviving deep pain creates awareness that ordinary comfort never can. Now your spirit notices warning signs earlier. Now your heart feels uneasy around certain energies before problems even begin. Now your soul reacts differently to situations that once trapped you easily. This is not weakness, and it is not paranoia. It is wisdom earned through hardship. Your suffering trained your discernment, and that discernment became a shield around your future. The same lies that once fooled you no longer sound convincing. The same manipulations that once controlled your emotions now appear obvious, and the same people who once drained your peace can no longer access your heart the same way, because your spirit has developed resistance through experience. There is a reason Allah allowed you to survive. instead of letting the pressure destroy you, because your story was never meant to end inside defeat. Your life was supposed to become proof that hardship does not last forever for those who remain patient. And even though there were moments you almost gave up, Allah kept carrying you through situations that should have broken you completely. Think about everything you survived already. There were seasons when your heart felt too tired to continue, yet somehow you continued anyway. There were nights when anxiety convinced you nothing would ever improve, yet you still woke up and kept moving. And now, when you look back, you realize something shocking. Every storm that promised to end your story eventually disappeared while you remained. The pain changed form, people changed, seasons changed, but Allah kept you alive through all of it, and that survival alone is evidence that your future was protected long before you understood the purpose behind your suffering. Now, listen carefully, because this part matters deeply. Your enemies are not only frustrated by your survival, they are exhausted by it. Every attempt to destroy your peace cost them energy, attention, obsession, and emotional investment. People who constantly focus on harming others slowly destroy themselves from the inside. Bitterness drains the soul, jealousy weakens judgment, and hatred eventually consumes the one carrying it. This is why many of those who fought against you are no longer operating with the same strength they once had, because while you were healing, they were wasting themselves on resentment. And the terrifying part for them is realizing that after all the effort, you still survived, still healed, still grew stronger. They invested years into trying to bury your confidence, only to watch Allah raise your spirit higher through. The very pain they created, the memory of your survival now speaks louder than anything they ever said about you, because people can ignore words, but they cannot ignore visible endurance. Every time they see you continuing forward, they are reminded that their attacks failed. Every smile you carry after surviving darkness becomes evidence against their intentions, and that silent evidence follows them everywhere, because nothing haunts an enemy more than seeing someone they tried to destroy become stronger through the destruction. This is why you no longer need revenge to prove your worth. Allah already exposed the truth through your endurance. Your peace became the answer, your growth became the response, and your continued survival became the testimony they cannot erase no matter how much they pretend otherwise. The season ahead of you is not about returning to who you were before the pain, because that version of you no longer exists. The fire changed you permanently, but not in the way your enemies hoped. They expected your suffering to make you bitter, fearful, emotionally weak, and spiritually empty. Instead, it made you wiser, more disciplined, more connected to Allah, and more aware of your own strength. This is why your future cannot repeat the exact same suffering again, because the person who once tolerated certain things has disappeared, and the new version of you carries lessons that cannot be unlearned. Your spirit now understands its own value. Your heart now recognizes false intentions faster, and your soul now seeks peace over chaos, even if it means walking alone for a while. And maybe the most important truth of all is this: Allah never abandoned you during the worst moments, even when silence made it feel that way. Every prayer was heard, every tear was counted, every injustice was witnessed, and every delay carried wisdom you could not yet understand, because sometimes Allah allows hardship not to destroy a believer, but to reveal what already exists inside them, strength you never knew you carried, patience you never thought possible, faith that survives even after disappointment. And now, after everything you endured, you are entering a season where your life itself will become evidence that pain does not get the final word. Healing does, growth does, faith does, and the believer who refuses to surrender eventually rises stronger than the storm that once threatened to erase them. So stand firm now, chosen one, because the chapter of endless suffering is closing behind you. The nights of confusion did not last forever, the betrayals did not define your destiny, and the fire that once terrified you has already transformed into the very thing that strengthened your spirit. Your story is no longer about surviving destruction. It is about revealing the person Allah was shaping through every battle, and from this moment forward your life will begin reflecting that transformation more clearly than ever before. The same world that watched you struggle will witness your peace, your wisdom, your patience, and your quiet strength, because Allah does not waste pain, and He does not abandon the believer who remains sincere through hardship. What tried to bury you only prepared you for a future stronger than the suffering you left behind. And this is only the beginning of what Allah is about to reveal through your life. There comes a moment in every chosen person's life when the battle suddenly feels strange, not because the attacks completely disappear, but because they stop carrying the same power they once had. And that moment confuses many people because outwardly life may still look ordinary, while inwardly something massive has shifted. The fear that once controlled your decisions starts fading, the anxiety that once kept you awake all night begins losing its voice, and the situations that used to shake your soul no longer moves you the same way. This is what happens when Allah pulls a servant out of a season of survival and begins introducing them to a season of authority, because suffering can only dominate a person for as long as that person believes they are powerless against it. But once the soul realizes that every storm survived became proof of Allah's protection, the entire atmosphere around that life changes. And that is exactly what has been happening to you, even if you have not fully understood it yet. For years you were carrying pain while still trying to appear normal in front of people who had no idea how exhausted you really were. You learned how to hide heartbreak behind silence, how to swallow disappointment without explaining yourself, and how to keep moving while parts of your spirit quietly begged for rest. But the reason Allah allowed you to survive that pressure was because your endurance was preparing you for a level of wisdom that comfort could never produce. Easy lives rarely create deep discernment, but painful seasons force a person to see reality clearly. They expose false loyalty, they reveal hidden intentions, and they teach the soul how temporary this dunya truly is. And now, because of everything you endured, your eyes have changed. You notice things faster, you trust differently, you move differently. And even your relationship with Allah carries a deeper sincerity because hardship stripped away the illusions that once distracted your heart. People around you may think your silence means weakness, but what they fail to understand is that survival taught you the value of protecting your energy. There was a time when you explained yourself to everyone, chased closure from people who never deserved access to your peace, and exhausted your soul trying to keep relationships alive that Allah was already removing from your path. But suffering changed that part of you completely. Now you understand that not every battle deserves your reaction, not every misunderstanding deserves your defense, and not every person deserves unlimited access to your spirit, because pain taught you something many people never learn until it is too late. Protecting your peace is sometimes an act of worship, and distancing yourself from constant chaos can become necessary for spiritual survival. There's also a reason certain people suddenly became uncomfortable around you after you started healing, because wounded people are easier to manipulate. Broken people often tolerate disrespect just to avoid loneliness. Exhausted souls accept treatment they should never accept simply because they no longer have strength left to resist it. But once Allah begins restoring a believer's inner strength, the entire dynamic changes. Suddenly, the same person who once stayed quiet starts setting boundaries. The same heart that once chased approval becomes selective about who it allows close, and the same soul that once tolerated emotional confusion begins craving peace more than attention, and that transformation threatens people who benefited from your weakness because your healing removes their control. This is why some individuals walked away once they realized you were no longer easy to drain emotionally. And listen carefully, because this next truth explains why your survival mattered more than you realize. Every major hardship you faced carried a hidden decision inside it. Either the pain would turn you bitter, or it would force you closer to Allah. Either the disappointment would harden your heart, or it would deepen your understanding. Either the betrayal would destroy your faith in people completely, or it would teach you how to place your trust in Allah first before anyone else. And despite every reason to collapse, your soul kept choosing growth over destruction. Even during your weakest moments, there was still sincerity inside your prayers. There was still a desire to become better instead of becoming cruel, and that quiet sincerity became one of the greatest reasons Allah continued protecting your future even when you could not see the full picture yourself. What makes your story different is not that you avoided pain, it is that the pain failed to erase your humanity. Many people survive hardship physically while becoming emotionally empty inside, but Allah protected something precious within you. He protected the softness of your heart even after betrayal. He protected your ability to care even after disappointment, and he protected your faith even after seasons that made absolutely no sense to you, and that preservation matters deeply because darkness always tries to convince suffering souls to become like the people who hurt them. It whispers that revenge is strength, that cruelty is protection, and that numbness is the only way to survive, but you resisted becoming that person, and because you resisted, Allah continued shaping your spirit instead of allowing your wounds to define your identity forever. The next chapter of your life will require a version of you that no longer operates from desperation, because desperation attracts the wrong people, the wrong opportunities, and the wrong decisions, and for a long time the enemy tried keeping you emotionally desperate through loneliness, confusion, financial pressure, and repeated disappointments, because desperate souls are easier to manipulate into accepting less than what Allah intended for them, but your suffering forced you to develop patience, and patience created discipline inside your spirit. Now you are learning how to wait without panicking, how to trust Allah without forcing outcomes, and how to walk away from things that disturb your peace even when your emotions beg you to hold on, and that growth is preparing you for blessings that require emotional maturity to maintain. There are some people who still secretly expect you to fail because they built their confidence around your struggles. They became comfortable watching you carry burdens, comfortable hearing about your setbacks, comfortable assuming your life would always remain stuck in survival mode. But Allah has a way of changing a person's story so completely that even those who doubted them are forced to witness the transformation, and what is coming into your life will not only bless you, but also expose how wrong certain people were about your future, because the same soul they underestimated has now survived battles they could never have endured themselves. Your endurance already proved that there is something greater protecting your path, and soon even your peace will begin speaking louder than your old pain ever did. One of the hardest truths you learned through suffering is that not everyone who smiles at you carries good intentions for your life. Some people study your weaknesses more than they celebrate your strengths. Some individuals stay close only to benefit from your kindness while secretly hoping you never fully rise, and that realization hurt deeply because your heart naturally wanted to believe the best about others, but Allah allowed certain betrayals because your future required sharper discernment. The next level of your life cannot be built with blind trust. It must be built with wisdom, and wisdom often arrives through painful experience. This is why your spirit now reacts differently around certain energies. Your soul notices inconsistencies faster, and your heart no longer ignores red flags. Simply to keep temporary connections alive, what once felt like punishment was actually preparation for authority, because authority without hardship often creates arrogance, but authority built through suffering creates humility, compassion, and wisdom, and Allah knew the future He planned for you required all three. This is why your journey became heavier than you expected, because your spirit was being trained through endurance. Every sleepless night developed emotional resilience, every delay strengthened your patience, every disappointment deepened your reliance on Allah, and every lonely season taught you how to survive without constant validation from people. Now when challenges appear, you do not collapse the same way anymore, because your spirit remembers everything Allah already brought you through before. There were moments during your hardest seasons when you genuinely believed your story might never improve. The pressure felt endless, the answers felt delayed, and the silence from heaven sometimes hurt more than the struggle itself. But now when you look back, you can slowly see how Allah was protecting you through things you once begged Him to change immediately. Some delays saved you from future destruction. Some closed doors protected your heart from people who would have damaged your peace permanently. And some endings only felt painful because you could not yet see what Allah was removing from your path. This is why your trust in Him became deeper after suffering, because eventually you realize that even painful protection is still mercy, and something else has changed inside you that many people around you cannot explain. You no longer fear loneliness the same way you once did, because hardship forced you to discover that Allah's presence can sustain a person even during isolation. There was a time when silence terrified you because silence exposed emotions you were trying to avoid, but now silence has become a place where your spirit recovers, reflects, and reconnects with what truly matters. And this transformation is powerful because people who are no longer controlled by loneliness become much harder to manipulate emotionally. They stop begging for unhealthy connections simply to avoid being alone. They stop compromising their values for temporary attention, and they begin choosing peace over toxic attachment. The enemy never expected you to become stronger through the very suffering designed to destroy you. They expected exhaustion to make you quit, expected heartbreak to make you bitter, expected pressure to destroy your faith completely, but every storm only pushed you closer to the wisdom Allah wanted your soul to carry, and now your life stands as proof that hardship cannot destroy what Allah has decided to preserve. Your enemies may still watch from a distance, but they no longer recognize the version of you standing before them now, because pain transformed you into someone far more disciplined, far more aware, and far more spiritually grounded than before. There is also a hidden reward that comes after surviving prolonged hardship. The soul begins valuing things differently. Suddenly, peace becomes more precious than popularity. Sincerity becomes more important than appearances, and closeness to Allah becomes more comforting than worldly validation, because suffering stripped away many illusions from your heart. It taught you how temporary human approval truly is, and it forced you to seek stability from the only source that never abandons His servants. And now, because your priorities changed, your future will also change. The things Allah brings into your life next will align with the maturity your spirit developed through endurance. Do not underestimate how much your prayers during painful nights already changed your destiny, because there were moments when your du'as were the only thing holding your soul together, moments when nobody else understood your internal battles except Allah Himself. And those quiet prayers carried weight far beyond what you realized at the time. Every sincere tear, every whispered plea, every exhausted sajda was seen by the one who never ignores the broken-hearted believer. And even though answers felt delayed, Allah was still writing outcomes in your favor behind scenes your eyes could not yet see. This is why certain disasters never fully reached you. This is why certain plans against you quietly collapsed. And this is why your spirit survived situations that should have buried your hope completely. Now, the season ahead requires courage from you. Not the courage to survive pain again, but the courage to finally believe that your life can become peaceful after everything you endured. Because many wounded people become so accustomed to struggle that peace itself begins feeling unfamiliar. But Allah did not create you only to suffer endlessly. Hardship was a chapter, not your permanent identity. And now your soul must slowly learn how to receive blessings without fear, how to experience calm without expecting immediate disaster afterward, and how to trust that Allah can write beautiful chapters after painful ones, because He absolutely can. You are no longer standing in the same spiritual position where the old attacks once found easy access to your emotions. Survival elevated your awareness, strengthened your boundaries, and deepened your relationship with Allah, and because of that elevation, certain forms of darkness simply cannot reach you the same way anymore. The traps still exist, but your discernment sees them earlier now. The manipulation still exists, but your spirit reacts faster now. And the chaos still exists, but your heart no longer desires to live inside it. This is what healing through faith begins to look like. Not perfection, but transformation. Not a life without tests, but a soul that no longer breaks under every storm. So as you move forward, understand this clearly. Your story did not survive the fire just to remain trapped in memories of pain forever. Allah brought you through those seasons so your life could eventually become proof that patience is never wasted. And soon you will start noticing signs of that transformation more clearly than ever before. Opportunities that once felt impossible will begin opening slowly. Peace will settle into places that once carried confusion, and your spirit will finally breathe without carrying constant fear of the next disaster, because the same Allah who protected you through the worst moments of your life is still guiding your future now, and He did not preserve you this long just to abandon you before your healing became complete.